Hey everyone. Today, a little bit about the principles of natural selection. Now, natural selection we teach kind of under this big umbrella of ecology. So, what is ecology? Is kind of the first question that we're going to answer. So, ecology, remember first, biology, the class that you're in is the study of life and of living things. Ecology is kind of a subset of biology and is the study of living things and how those living things interact with their environment, not just with other living things, but also with the non living things in a particular area. So that means as ecologists or ecology minded students like yourselves, we need to define abiotic and biotic. These are words that ecologists and biologists use to define aspects of an environment. So abiotic factors are the non-living things in a particular environment. The biotic factors are the living things in the environment. Now, what I would also add here, so kind of take these notes, and I like this, this side-by-side comparison. I would also add some examples. Now, biotic examples are often really, really easy for students to identify. If we're looking at a given area, think about your own backyard or the local park or something like that. Thinking about the biotic factors is really easy. You've got grass on the ground and maybe some trees, and if it's like kind of a wetland area like what we have near the school here, maybe there's some reeds and cattails and things like that, and the birds that live in those cattails, and maybe some small mammals like mice and voles, and maybe you even have some small weasels or ermine or maybe even some muskrats, maybe even a beaver in this area is not too uncommon. And like all of these other living things that you might have in a given area. Those are really easy to identify. The abiotic factors often students struggle with. So think about the non-living things in that area. What are those non-living things? Maybe you were able to understand or identify really quickly that non-living things include the water and the air, but a lot of times that's as far as students get when I ask this question. So also include things like the dirt, rocks, temperature, climate, weather, uh, you know, all of those things come into play when we're talking about the abiotic factors that influence how organisms live. They can be really, really important, in some cases, as important as the biotic factors in a given environment, maybe even more important than the other biotic factors. So it's important that we're able to identify the abiotic things, but it might take some practice to be able to really view all of that stuff, because sometimes you've got to zoom out and look at the big picture to really see all of those things like weather and climate and stuff like that. So we're also going to define a few terms in this video. So these are the principles of natural selection. All of that stuff within ecology is affected by and affects natural selection. And to better understand that, we've got some terms that we need to define. So the first is selection pressure. What is a selection pressure? It is a change in an organism's environment that drives an adaptation. Now put an asterisk next to the word adaptation. We're going to define that in a little bit. The selection pressure is the thing that is pushing the change along. A variation is a difference, can be physical or chemical, between organisms of the same species. The two tigers shown there, one has, what you would normally think of as a tiger, orange fur with black stripes, and the other has a white coat with black stripes, and that would be a variation, just a difference in their coat color. Okay, these can be fur color, skin color, hair length, height, eye color, body structure, blood type, hormone differences, immune differences. Okay, I may have brown hair with a whole lot of gray. You might have dark brown hair or blonde hair or black hair or whatever. Okay, that would be a variation. I have blue eyes, maybe you got brown eyes. That's a variation. I'm 5'9", maybe you're 6'2", right? That is another variation. Variations are really, really easy to identify in some cases, but they can be much more difficult to identify in the case of like hormone differences and immune differences. So they're not always very obvious from one organism to the next. An adaptation. Now, an adaptation is a specific type of variation, okay? And it's a variation that makes an organism better able to reproduce or more fit for its habitat or environment. In the past, I have defined fitness for you in class, and fitness just means that an organism is better able to reproduce than the next, is said to have greater fitness. So an adaptation is a variation that leads to greater fitness. Take, for example, this polar bear. Now, a polar bear's closest relative is a brown bear. So let's use that as a comparison. A polar bear compared to a brown bear has a much narrower snout and head. And that's so that a polar bear can more easily poke its head through the ice and see prey above the water, or look below the ice and see prey below the water or below the ice. And it also makes it more streamlined for swimming, things like that. Polar bears also have larger paws than a similarly sized brown bear. That helps them for swimming, helps them to kind of float on top of the snow a little bit better, so they can walk on the snow more easily. They also have thicker fur and longer, more slender bodies and sharper claws and differences in teeth and body shape, obviously, as well. So they've got a lot of differences that make them better able to survive in their environment, and those differences would be considered adaptations. Now, all of these things, the selection pressures choose the adaptations, and those adaptations will then lead to greater reproductive success. So those that are best adapted will survive and produce the most offspring. So you may have heard the term survival of the fittest. And the fittest, remember, is a term specifically that means can reproduce better than the others. So it's not what we traditionally think of fitness in terms of being like faster or stronger or maybe running for longer distances, that sort of thing. That's not what we're talking about here. Fitness refers to an organism's reproductive success. So it can pass those traits on to the next generation a little bit better. So let me give you a real world example of natural selection. And in this case, it's actually a human influenced example of natural selection. So let's imagine we have a population of fish. And in this population of fish, just like in the population of humans, there are natural variations in size. So let's say all of these fish pictured are 2 years old. Sure. Okay. All of these 2-year-old fish are of varying sizes. Now, humans enter the picture, and because the large fish are easier to process, and we also just put a premium on bigger fish, um, because of that, the big fish are selected by us at a greater rate. And so much so, in fact, that like small fish actually can even often swim out of the nets that are used, or potentially are tossed back. Okay. Now, those bigger fish are selected by us at a greater rate. And that means that those smaller fish, their genes move on to the next generation at a higher rate than the big fish, because the big fish don't get a chance to reproduce because we're busy eating them. Okay. So that means if this continues long enough, eventually we have a population of fish that's much smaller than it used to be on average. And this is exactly what has happened in fisheries in the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, off the coasts of Europe and North America, Asia. Okay, fish like Atlantic and Pacific salmon, Atlantic and Pacific cod, those types of fish that have been fished at great rates, in some cases are like 40% smaller now than they were 50 years ago. So it's a pretty dramatic change in overall fish size. And that is a natural adaptation to the selection pressure that humans have put on them. It's really, really interesting way to look at it. And the key to understanding this is that it's the population that's changing, not any of the individuals in it. There's no fish making a conscious decision to stay small. What's happening is that those small fish, though, are passing their genes on to the next generation at a higher rate. They're laying more eggs because the big fish are being eaten. So there it is. That's kind of natural selection in a nutshell. As we proceed through this unit, next we're going to be talking about photosynthesis and cell respiration and how those play into natural selection and ecology on the whole. I hope you have a wonderful day. Get out and enjoy some sunshine.